8 Tries to Freedom, by Stephen Lake. Edgar stared at the large wooden church doors in front of him and groaned. Not again, he thought. For the past 7 nights he'd experienced the same dream over and over again, sometimes even several times in just one night. And each time the results were the same. The dream would begin with him standing in front of a large, ornate, classical church door. Behind this door lurked what he felt was likely the ugliest monster in the entire world. Edgar almost wondered if someone had beaten it with an ugly stick one too many times. Or possibly not often enough. And it was this monster that he was forced to escape from over and over again, and always to no avail. As he stood in front of the doors, he heard a telltale growl and a scratching on the other side that signaled the start of his nightly monster adventure. He quietly wondered what he'd done to deserve being inflicted with this strange set of circumstances. More scratching echoed at the door, and then a bang. Just like every other time before this, there would soon come a bone-chilling roar from the other side, which was a sign that the creature that had tormented his dreams for weeks now was growing restless. Edgar looked around the area as usual to see if anything had changed, and then sighed. Nope, it was still the same old hallway, the same old wooden door, and the same old plain white walls that faced the fake church facade. He then looked towards the far edge of the facade where there sat a small cubbyhole that looked like a little broom closet without a door. He'd tried hiding in there once before, but a lot of good that had done him. It had taken the monster a whole 2 seconds to find him. He walked towards the short hallway that led away from the facade, and then out into the main building. As he trotted down the hallway, he passed several lecture halls, the library, the swimming pool, several classrooms, and even the cafeteria. He'd tried hiding in each one of these places before, save for the swimming pool, and yet the monster had found him every time. But the strangest part of all this was that, for a monster as seriously ugly as it was, it had never hurt him. If it caught him, it would simply remind him of what he needed to do to win the game, which was to escape the building and the grounds, without getting caught, after which the dream would end. The requirement to win seemed easy enough in principle. But to date he had yet to succeed at doing that. He paused and shook his head. This was getting ridiculous. There had to be a solution to this where he could finally win, and be done with this repeating nightmare. Just then an idea struck him. If he could incapacitate the monster, it might give him time to discover how to escape from the grounds. He hoped it would be enough to help him win the game and end the dreams. He quickly looked around and tried to find something to battle the monster with. Getting an idea from his old high school days, he hurried down to the gym and grabbed a baseball bat. He then hid out in the locker room and waited for the monster to arrive. Sure enough, just like before, it found him with no trouble. As it trotted up to him, he stepped up onto a bench and swung at it with all his might. The blow was straight and firm, and connected with perfection. However, instead of the ringing tone of steel on bone, he instead heard a light whoosh and felt the bat bounce off the creature as though it were made of foam. The monster then grinned at him knowingly. "Aw, nuts," thought Edgar. He then tossed the bat aside and listened begrudgingly as the monster repeated the same set of instructions to him just as before. After this, Edgar awoke. He glanced over at his alarm clock and noticed that it was almost 7 a.m. Time to get ready for work. He groaned sleepily, and then rolled out of bed. A few hours later he strolled into work with an espresso in one hand, and a cream cheese bagel in the other. "If you keep drinking that stuff, it's going to kill you," chided one of his co-workers. Edgar snorted. "I'm more likely to get eaten by King Ugly than die of espresso overdose," he quipped. The man cocked an eyebrow in surprise. "You're still having that dream?" he asked. Edgar nodded. "Yeah, sadly enough. And all the creature said I have to do is find a way to escape from the school grounds without getting caught. You'd think by now I'd have figured out how to do that already. But, apparently not." "Can't you just climb out a window?" asked the coworker. Edgar shook his head. "Tried that. He was out there waiting for me." The coworker chuckled. "You're kidding." Edgar sighed. "I wish." "Well, you escaped the building, didn't you?" Edgar nodded. "I did. but apparently not in the way he wanted me to. The coworker laughed. Well, I'm no expert at dream interpretation, but have you considered that you might be having this same nightmare over and over again because of something you're afraid of? Edgar squinted curiously. What do you mean? He asked. Well, I read somewhere once that nightmares are our mind's way of expressing fears that we have, but don't realize are there. For example, you might be afraid of cats, but you don't know you are. So you start having nightmares about cats as a way for your mind to help you overcome that fear. Edgar snorted. I doubt it. The monster is never mean. He's just really ugly, and pretends to be scary until he catches me. He then becomes really nice as he explains the rules to me again for the umpteenth time. So, have you tried escaping through the gym? Asked the coworker. Edgar nodded. I tried that and every other room in the school to no avail. Interesting. Is there anywhere that you haven't been? Edgar thought about this for a bit, and then remembered something. I've never tried escaping through the pool room. Well? Then give that a try. Edgar shook his head. Nah. Why not? Because, that monster is psychic. Or, at least, I think he is. He always seems to know where I'm at every single time. Have you considered that he might instead be following your scent? If he is, then anything you can do to cover your trail might keep him from finding you. Edgar perked up at this idea. But, this is a dream. Do you think it'll work there? The coworker shrugged. It's worth a try. Edgar pondered this some more. How well does water cover someone's trail? He asked. Pretty good from what I've seen. It's typically why crooks will dive into rivers to help mask their scent from the tracking hounds. Edgar grinned. Then I might just try that. Later that night Edgar found himself standing in front of the church door just like he had so many nights before. However, unlike previously, he immediately turned and hurried down the hallway to his right. He then raced up to the swinging doors that led to the pool area and peeked inside. He soon spotted close to 36 people who were in the pool enjoying themselves. Just then he heard the echo of the monster's growls behind him as it began to bang on the church doors. Not wanting to waste any more time, he threw the swinging doors open, raced inside, and then quickly searched for the best place to hide. He eventually decided that he would need to wade across the pool to the deep end in order to properly mask his scent, and allow him to mingle with the other revelers in the pool. The sounds of splintering wood soon echoed through the pool doors. Realizing he was out of time, rather than wading through the water, he instead ran around to the deep end and dove in. He then ducked down behind several nearby people who bobbed playfully in the water. The sound of heavy footsteps quickly grew louder as the monster rapidly approached the door. Realizing he was out of time, Edgar took a deep breath, and slipped under the water. To his surprise, he could still see the door very clearly, despite the fact that water normally distorts any light that passes through it. This worried him. If he could easily see the doors to the pool room, then there was no question that the monster could see him too. Just then the doors to the pool room flew open and the monster charged in. Edgar felt his heart leap into his throat as he watched this from beneath the water. He looked on anxiously as the monster scanned the room for any sign of him. Go away, you ugly clod, he thought. But instead, the monster moved deeper into the room, and then opened a second set of doors on the opposite side that led to the outdoors. Edgar was now becoming worried. How thorough would the monster be before he was discovered? Even if he never was, Edgar now had an even more pressing issue than simply being found. He was running out of air. After a moment the monster gave up his search, and then made his way out of the pool room. Certain it was safe, Edgar popped out of the water, quickly caught his breath, and then dove back under, just in case the monster came back. But, to his great relief, it didn't. Edgar popped his head out of the water again a minute later, commando style, and studied the area. The others in the pool still seemed completely oblivious to his presence, or that the monster had even been there. It was as though everyone was having so much fun that nobody either noticed or cared. That had actually worked to his advantage, as it had kept them from accidentally giving away his presence. He then climbed out of the pool and stood there quietly. But as he did, half expecting the monster to reappear at any moment, his mind slowly began to realize something. Looking down at his clothes, to his complete amazement, he found them to be absolutely bone dry, despite having just climbed out of the pool. This was both perplexing and intriguing. But now wasn't the best time to ponder this small curiosity. He soon made his way through the second set of doors, and found himself standing on a loading dock. But what he found there surprised him. Previously, whenever he tried to escape from the building, the landscape around him was always awash with brilliant gold and silver hues of light. This time, however, the land was instead filled with the inky blackness of a moonless midnight. Even the stars weren't out. Studying the area further, he soon spotted a beat-up old Ford pickup sitting nearby. Edgar grinned at this. He could now escape from this place, and do it with speed. Or, at least, not on foot like before. He then quickly slipped into the truck and was pleased to find that the keys were in the ignition. But, before he started it, he paused briefly, and checked behind himself. Still no sign of the monster. So he started the truck, put it in gear, turned on the lights, and drove off into the darkness of the night. He then awoke. He rolled over in his bed and studied his clock. It was only 1 in the morning. He wondered if he'd finally beaten the monster's little game and escaped. He then remembered that, unlike before, the monster hadn't caught him, or given him the typical speech on how to win the game he was being forced to play. Maybe he had finally won. There was only one way to find out. He immediately rolled over, closed his eyes, and went back to sleep. He awoke again what seemed like only moments later to discover that his alarm was going off, and sunlight was pouring through the windows. He smiled. The dream hadn't come back. Maybe this time he'd finally beaten the monster. So he quickly got up, fixed his typical caffeine-laden cup of espresso, and a cream cheese-covered bagel, and then made his way to work. However, as he strolled inside, just like normal, he was caught by surprise when everyone in the office stood up in their cubicles and began to applaud him. "Hello, what's this for?" he asked curiously. "Well done, Edgar, you finally did it," said one of his coworkers. "Did what?" asked Edgar curiously. "Come on, the boss wants to see you," said the coworker. Edgar quietly followed the man across the office amidst continued applause from other people in the room. The coworker then led him up to the door of the company president, and gestured for him to enter. "Go on, he's waiting for you inside," he said. Edgar smiled, opened the door, and then gasped in horror. Behind the desk, dressed in an expensive 3-piece suit and tie, sat the monster of his dreams. The monster smiled at him proudly, and said, "Come on in, Edgar. You did very well last night. So now it's time we talked about the next part of your challenge." The end.